talk about, so we've talked about the issue. Now we're going to talk about the things that we can do as social workers. Okay, and first I'm going to talk a lot about the practice piece with family members and the person who's starting at the individual level, and then we'll talk about policy level. So, it's really important to consider the personal. And what I mean by this is, we really, and y'all will, I know you've heard this a million times, and if you haven't, you should have, because as social workers, the most important thing is that we need to know ourselves. And when we're working in a field, we need to understand how we feel. So working in end of life, it's really important for me to know whether I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable talking. I need to know what are my attitudes, what are my values. You know, with physician, let's say physician-assisted suicide, if I was living in Oregon, I'd really need to know how I feel about whether I could sit there with someone who's doing that. I need to know those things. And there are a lot of things that will come up when you work at end of life. These ethical issues will come up because clients will bring them to you. And so we need to know, and we need to know our stereotypes and biases because they do impact the care. And this is really important because we all have biases. It's really hard not to. Sometimes we only have them at an intellectual level because they've kind of the media. It's like maybe you see someone who's homeless and you think, why don't they get a job? And then you stop and you say, wait a minute, I heard that on TV. I honestly know that it's not that easy to go get a job. Do you know what I mean? You probably had those moments. But there's so much media always giving us messages. But the other thing is we have experiences in life, etc., family members, and so we do get these biases, but we need to understand them, we need to work on them, but we also need to recognize them because they really make a difference when we are working in end of life. And you know, it's not all Hallmark. It's like I remember, you know, where the person's dying and everybody's loving, and yeah, no, it's not. I mean, there are those deaths. And I had one where, this was in another state, so it's confidential. I mean, nobody would know. This person had abused his children physically all of their lives and emotionally in their adult lives. And you know what? He still was. And he wasn't a bit sorry. That was really hard for me to work with him. And I had to really give it thought. Can I give him a good dying process, even as he is using language with me and talking with me in certain ways? What boundaries do I set? You know, what is all right for him to talk with me? You know, it's not always it's difficult, and you will get triggered because things will trigger you from your own life. And so it's just very important. I can't emphasize that enough. And here I say, you know, there really are triggers that can happen. I remember after my dad died, I got a client, and it was just so similar. And I really was struggling, and I realized I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. It was still too fresh. I wasn't going to be there for the client, so I asked another social worker to take the case. And some people would say, you should take every case. I don't agree. I didn't need to be working my stuff out while this man is dying. You know, so that was a good thing for me to step back. And I've covered for other social workers who have had to step back. We had somebody who had the wife was dying. Honestly, her age was the same age as the wife. Her husband was the same age. And their kids were all the same age. It just freaked her out, and she was a nurse. She couldn't do it. Well, good for her for saying she can't, because there are other people who can step in and do that. So how do you do that? So it's all well and good to say know yourself. Okay, go do that. But how do you do that? You really do have to reflect. And I don't think there's a day that reflection ends. I think I spend my life reflecting. Whether it's reflecting how I interact with students or a student and thinking, did I handle that well? You know, or something that I do and I think, why did I get so mad? And I think about those things because there's usually a reason over and beyond the person who I got mad at. So this self-reflection is like, for me, it is just a part of life. And I think as social workers, we really have to think about that. Things are always happening to us. So how we feel about things are going to change. Being honest with yourself and recognizing you're human. Sometimes you're going to say the wrong thing. You won't have meant to, but you're just going to. It's going to slip out. And then you're going to think, oh, no, I can't believe I said that. And I've had social workers call me crying or students come to my office crying. We all do that. We all have a day when we say something. And we are so sorry. And what we hope is, one, that we'll learn from it. We'll never do it again. And we'll hope, too, that the other person will be forgiving, because we are all humans. And so we need to be kind to ourselves. And we need to be kind to ourselves when we're struggling with a bias and we think, how the heck can I have a bias when I'm a social worker? We need to be kind to ourselves. The other thing is we really need to be thoughtful in terms of culture. And I gotta say, every now and then I am so stunned by something that I realized I was so looking out the lens of my eyes, my own experience. And I know I asked a faculty member if I could share this. So one of our faculty members is African American, and we were talking, I forgot what it was that we were talking about. It was something where we would all go out as faculty members and talk to people about, I forgot prejudice, I can't remember, that part's not important. But I remember thinking, you know, this is something we should all do, and everybody nodding. And afterwards, he came to my office and he said, can I talk to you? And he said, I can't do that. He said, do you know what would happen if I went out and said those things as a black man? And it hit me and I thought, no, he couldn't do that. It would be so unsafe for him. And it just hit me, white privilege, boy, all over. But it's not even the white privilege, it's the culture. It's remembering that the way you want to die, your traditions and your beliefs and your rituals are not the same as those of other people. And this has nothing to do with color even. Culture is not color, right? Everybody has culture. But we have to remember. And we have to treat people as individuals. And we have to be careful not to lump people and say, this person is black, so that means they're likely African American, which means they're going to be spiritual. And I remember going in a house of I knocked on the door. It was my first visit as a hospice social worker. It was an African American family. She opened the door and she said to me, before you come in this house, she said, I'm going to tell you, we're not spiritual. She said, the nurse that came before you, and I'm thinking, oh great, the nurse did this. She was like, oh, we'll get you spiritual and we know you're, she said, so you still okay with coming in? And I'm like, yes ma'am. So, you know, irritating, right? Assumptions made. So, you know, we really need to think about this. Okay, and we need to think about how we handle death and dying, how we've learned to grieve, what's our level of discomfort, what are our beliefs around death and dying. And so I gave you this. It's experiencing loss as a child. It's I think the first thing after your PowerPoint. And I don't want you to do it now, but I would like y'all to go home and find like 10 or 15 minutes. Nobody's around. Go shut yourself up and do this. This is really important. It's really important because I have a number of, I'm not teaching right now because of all my administrative stuff, but I have a number of independent studies and I'm having my students do this exercise. Excuse me, I've been getting over the flu. And they talk about how surprised they are at what they learned from this. And they really didn't think they would learn anything. I always said when I did hospice, I used to do volunteer groups, train volunteers at a hospice, and I always had them do this exercise. Because we need to know before we work with someone who's dying how it's going to impact us. And examples are like, think back about a loss in your childhood. So when I did it, my sister died when she was 5. She had Down syndrome and I was 6. And we were really close. We weren't even a year apart. And my sister got sick one night, and then the next morning she wasn't in the lower bunk bed. And my parents said, well, she went, you know, my father said, your mother took her to the hospital because she's sick. She never came home again. Later I learned she died of pneumonia. But nobody talked to me about it because in our family you didn't talk about it. And if you brought up her name after she did die, you get in trouble. People get angry at you. So what I was taught was, buck up, move on, don't ask questions. And so my brother died at 32, was killed by a drunk driver, same thing. Really clear in my family, do not mention his name. Do not talk about him. That was what I was taught, but I didn't want to do that. And I wanted, as my son will tell you, I got really good about talking about death. Yeah, we've all been there a minute ago. I told you about that. But I think it is important. And I want to remember my brother. I tell jokes about my brother all the time, and I want to remember him. I want to remember my sister. I want to say their names and talk about them. So I made a change. And because if I experience loss like that and I'm working with somebody on a loss, I might be thinking, boy, this person is really emotional. I might not say it, but it will impact how I'm thinking because of how I was taught. So this is really important, and it really does help you to think about how you learned loss and grief. And sometimes a word doesn't need to be said, like in my family, where that's just the way it was. So I really would encourage you to do that exercise, even if you're not going to work in end of life, right? The other one is the support system exercise. So I always have I teach an undergrad class, and I have my students do this. And this has caused some breakups of boyfriends and girlfriends. And I've said, don't tell them who gave you this exercise. But I think this is really important. This is the one I talked earlier about, the woman in the Holocaust, because all she had was me when she was done in the middle. So I gave y'all to do, and this is another one where I'd encourage you to do it very quietly. There's good things here for people to figure out for you as a social worker. The thing about social workers is we often attract people that want to talk to us about, can you tell me about this, or let me tell you about my problem, because we're social workers and we're going to fix it, right? Well, do you really? It's like a friend of mine who cuts hair. She doesn't want to cut hair at night. She cuts it all day, right? So do we want to do therapy all night? No. And so we want to be careful. We want to make sure we have a support system. So 3 things that you can do. Yourself is already in the middle. And then what you do is you put all the different, and this is all made up, you put all the different people, and it can be things, you could have work, you could have school, all the different types of support systems. And you put those on there, and then you do 2 things. One, you note whether the bond is strong, conflictual, or not very close, because that's important. And then the other thing are your arrows. So, like with my cat. So, my cat gives me love, I give my cat love, right? Nice, even balance there. I have a friend who, I can call up, I can say, oh my gosh, I had the worst day. And she'll say, tell me what happened. Right away, I'll tell her. She can call me, and I will right away say, tell me what happened. Our exchange of energy is like this. It's wonderful. But, remember, I'm making all this up. And then a friend who, when I say, y'all might have had friends like this, I had the absolute worst day. And that person says, wait till I tell you about mine. And then they launch into theirs, you hang up later and you think, I never talked about mine. Because that's a friend where your energy is always going out. We need to know this, and we don't even think about it. And that's what my students, they'll do this and they'll be like, oh, I didn't realize I have so many people that my energy is going out, but it's not coming back. Or conflictual relationships. So this is something that I think, and I encourage my students to do this like once a year, just kind of revisit. You guys, no matter what you're doing as social workers, burnout can be high. It can be hard when you care so deeply. And it doesn't even have to be that you're working with people that are dying. You're working with children that are being abused or whatever it is. We need to really at all times be aware that we have the support we need. And like some of my students that ditch their partners, maybe not have so many people around where it is all one way and we don't have them given back to us. So I would encourage you to do that exercise. I think it's very helpful, and sometimes it's helpful because you look and you think, you know what, I got a great support system. Okay, so let me go back for a second. Walk beside your client. So I'm going to talk about working with clients, but the thing I want to say, because the first thing is thinking about you. Now let's talk about client. Walk beside your client. Basically what I'm saying there is you need to be where your client is. When someone is dying, in particular, when I have a client who is dying, maybe they're in denial. Well, then that's where they need to be. That's where they've chosen to be. So if I walk ahead of them and try to get them to get out of the denial, I'm not really right there with them. But if they're ready to talk about dying and I'm like really uncomfortable with it, I'm walking behind them. Again, I am not with them. I should be walking right beside them, supporting them in their journey the way they want their journey to be. And that's what I mean by walking beside your client. And in end of life, our client is not just the person who's dying, it's also the family. So, everybody know these characters? Winnie the Pooh, Rabbit, and Christopher Robin. Okay. One day, Winnie the Pooh went to visit his friend Rabbit. Rabbit, always the consummate host, offered Pooh some honey, which Pooh gladly accepted. Pooh, true to form, ate rather too much honey, and as he was leaving, he got stuck in Rabbit's door. Pooh was stuck half in and half out. He couldn't go back in, and he couldn't go out. He was stuck so tight he couldn't even sigh. While Pooh was stuck there, he asked simply, "Is there someone who can sit with me and read a story or offer a word of comfort to a bear wedged in great tightness?" The important thing about the story to remember is what Pooh was asking for and what he wasn't asking for. He wasn't asking for anyone to pull him out of that hole or to push him back into Rabbit's house. He wasn't asking for a discussion about how it was a higher power's will that he was stuck in that hole, or that he wouldn't have been put in that hole if it wasn't believed that he could handle being in that hole. He didn't ask any of that. He didn't ask for advice or for solutions. What he did ask, in essence, is, will someone be there for me? Will someone be there for me while I struggle in my painful experience? That is what our clients often ask of us. So, listening, absolutely essential. Essential. I can't tell you how essential. I've seen social workers interrupt clients, talk over clients, put words in clients' mouth. "Oh, you know what? You look really down today. I guess you're not feeling well." And the person's like, "Well, I was feeling really good till you said that." So being very careful. Really listening, allowing for silence. You know, I can't tell you the number of clients where, I remember I went to this woman's house and I just loved her. I worked with her for 6 months before she died. And I went in one day and I looked at her and I said, "So what would you like to talk about today?" She said, "Would you do me a favor? Could we just sit on the back porch?" And she said, "I just want to hold your hand and I just want to listen to the birds and feel life, but I don't want to do it alone." We did it for an hour. And at the end, we said not one word. That's what she needed. Silence is a good thing. We speak too soon sometimes, and I catch myself, this is something I'm really working on. It's not saying something too soon, because people need time to process. So when you ask somebody a question, it's like with students, I always instruct new instructors, stand quiet. You ask a question, you could stand there for 5 minutes. It's not that students are being stubborn, it's that students are thinking about what you ask. You can't expect them to just come up with the answers like that. People need time to process. So listen in a non-judgmental manner, being very aware of our facial expressions, because I know clients have been talking to me about a plan they have, and sometimes I'm like, but I'm looking like this the whole time, right? And we've all been there. So being very aware. And don't always try to fix things like with Pooh. Think about Pooh. Pooh just wanted people there. That woman just wanted me to be there. What I will often ask clients, or when I was working with clients, was after they would talk to me, maybe they would tell me a bunch of issues or whatever, and then I would say to them, "So today do you want to work on those issues, or do you just want me to listen?" And there are a lot of days where people would say, "I just need to talk about them and I just want you to listen. I don't want you to fix it." So ask them, do you want to work on solutions or do you just want someone to listen? And that's okay, because sometimes that is the solution, just listening. It's huge. And the other thing, listening, I don't know if y'all do this, I do this, and I'm working on that too, is oftentimes when I'm listening, so if you and I are having a conversation and you're telling me your thoughts and I'm thinking, oh yeah, as soon as she stops talking, I'm going to say this. Does anybody else maybe do that occasionally? Yeah. I would do that with clients. And the thing is I was missing. So in my head, I'm automatically coming up with, ooh, I can get a wheelchair. Ooh, I can do this. I can do that. Am I hearing what that person said? No. So you have to listen and then take a moment, and you can even say, so let me go back over what you said, and let's kind of take it piece by piece. So really important. So I'm working on that. It's one of my many issues. Communicate, ask open-ended questions. I used to park my car before I'd go in someone's house. I'd read back through the file, and then I would think of a couple of open-ended questions. Because if I didn't, invariably what I would do when I sat down was ask a closed-ended question that got me a nice yes or no, and then we're looking at each other, right? So think about questions that elicit, so how are you feeling today? So what was your week like? Rather than, anything that's just going to elicit yes or no. And pay attention to nonverbal. Crucial. Crucial not only in terms of the individual, but in the family too. You have to pay attention to it all. But the nonverbal, some of it can be cultural. I remember working with a client where in their culture, the space, it was almost non-existent. It was really important to almost touch the person when you were talking to them. I did not realize the whole time I was backing up until I hit the wall. Because he kept coming, and I was like so uncomfortable. But I have to be aware that I have to be okay with that. I have to do the best I can. Pay attention to space. If you start to go to hug a client, or if you start to lean over and you see the person back up a little bit, that was your hint. Pay attention. Pay attention to what people are saying, but also pay attention to what they may be saying in another way. Well, and that's a good example where somebody gets stuck on a trauma in their life or a memory or whatever. And I think you're right. I think there are times when we just listen. If we've already tried in some way to broach it or to talk about, to see if they want to talk about it more like, whether you follow up questions about how you feel about that today or how you felt about it then and how you feel about it today. I mean, if you try to broach it and the person just ignores that and goes on with the story, then that is where they are, and that's where we need to be with them. See, exactly right. So if your client talks a lot about loss, don't avoid or change the subject, believe it or not. I know one of the things I learned when I was doing my research, I was interviewing terminally ill elders, hospice patients, interviewed a couple of hundred, and the thing that came up many times was, this is the first time I've gotten to talk about my death in dying, telling me that, and I would say, well, what about your social worker? Oh, she just gets red every time I talk about it, and she looks down and changes the subject. So that's why I created this class that I now teach when I teach in this school, because of that, because I feel like that's why we need this type of education. Except that you can't always take away the pain, you can't always fix it, you just can't. You do the best you can, but you have to walk beside your client and be where they are. Reassurance and affirming the normalcy of grief reaction. So if somebody is really angry, that it's okay that they're angry, they're dying. Maybe they feel angry about it. I had one woman whose husband laughed until the day he died. He did quarter tricks. I still have the 2 quarters he pulled out of my ears. And that was the way he wanted to die. It's the way he lived it was the way he wanted to die. Be careful that you don't take people's feelings, that you don't take ownership without meaning to. Using phrases like, I know exactly how you feel. What do you think that says if you're talking to me and I say, I know exactly how you feel? You what?
You don't know.
You don't know. If your father dies and my father dies, I don't know how you feel. Because maybe my relationship was horrible with my father. So, I have all this remorse and guilt, whereas your relationship was close and loving, and you have other, do you see what I mean? We don't know how people feel. We don't. Because everybody feels differently. And the minute we do that, do you think that's a conversation getter-goer? No, it's a conversation stopper. And I've heard people say, well, if you know how I feel, what's the point of talking about it? So the most important thing, I like when people get feisty. The most important thing is to say something like, I cannot begin to imagine how you're feeling. What does that do? What?
Sympathy.
Sympathy, definitely. Can't imagine how they feel.
They'll start to tell you how they feel.
Exactly, because what you've done is you've opened it up. You've said, I can't imagine. So basically what you're saying is, tell me about it. And you've done it in a way that's very empathetic and not taken ownership of the other person's feelings. I use this all the time. I just think it's crucial. Y'all had for those of you that are in classes, you had my article that I wrote on MineFrames, which came out of my research. And now is being used in Switzerland. They're using it as an assessment instrument. What came out of, I did this research, and my question was, have you ever considered hastening your death? If so, why? If not, why not? Because what I wanted to find out from elders who were dying is, what is it that we do well, and what is it that we're not doing so well? And the other thing was, I thought it would just be this nice dichotomous group of people that have never considered and people who had considered. And what came out was these different mind frames that people had towards dying. Some people were like, you know, just so accepting of their death and so ready for it. Well, I learned a lot about what got them there. It's in the article. You know, or people who were not ready and not accepting. It was very interesting. And it was very helpful because as social workers, being aware of how really understanding where your client is. Tough to walk beside your client if you have no idea how they're feeling about their death. And I've had clients say, you know, I'm just struggling with coming to terms with this, but I need to so that I can die in peace. So it's somebody who's not ready to die, but what they're saying to me is, but will you help me get there? So really thinking about it. And these two things, wishing for death and considering a hastened death. These are tricky things in end of life based on the agency or hospital or where you work because there's different policies. I worked at one hospice where you did not have a conversation. When somebody said they were considering hastening their death or anything about it, you were to stop and say, I'm sorry, our hospice does not support that. And you know, if you are considering something like that, then you know, we really need to talk about whether hospice is for you. I worked at another hospice where, and this is what I believe, that this is a conversation starter. And people would talk to me about why they were considering hastening their death or why they wished, and they were all things that we could work on. I couldn't work on the fact that they were dying, but that wasn't what I heard when people said that. It was all these other issues that they had, like the woman whose son is saying, oh crap, you're still alive. She was wishing really badly. But there's something we can do. So it's really important to understand where a person is, because then that helps get to are they happy where they are, and what maybe is it that leads them to be there. The other thing is word choices, really important. These can be cultural in terms of, you know, in the family, choices that people use. There are clients I've had that absolutely, you'd never say death or dying. When I was doing a study with the Latino community here in Dane County, they had me take out death and dying out of the whole thing. The same when I was working on a study with the Hmong community. Some communities, you don't say those words. Remember what I said about the Navajo? But there are other things that people use. Cross the river, I'm walking on, passing to the other side, going to the spirit world, and other things like I'm kicking the bucket. The man that was so funny, he was always circling the drain. And whenever I'd see him, he'd do it with his finger, he'd say, I'm this much closer. And his wife would whack him. She hated that. So being very thoughtful, listening to what people say and using those words. And this I've already talked about, not assuming. We can't ever assume that we know. Remember the woman, the African-American woman in the spiritual. Just keep that in mind. We meet each person as an individual, and we go from there. And I'll talk about that. Being buried, language is a huge, huge thing. It's a really important thing. Interpreters are not always the solution. It depends upon the interpreter. Interpreters can be very uncomfortable with deaf and dying. And that can be an issue. Or an interpreter can be an interpreter, but maybe be in that community so well known that the interpreter is not going to interpret exactly what you say. Interpreters can be very valuable in that they can say, you know what, I can't say that. I can't use that. I can't tell this person she's dying. That's not what we do in our culture. So I'm not going to say that. So interpreters, important to really talk to them and work with them, and that they're present. I've had students who have had to tell a parent that they were dying because the doctor didn't speak the language, and so the student had to go and translate for the doctor. And no young person should have to do that. Shouldn't be put in that position. So just being very aware, and there's really good articles out there on that. That's a huge topic. Touch, being so careful about what is appropriate and what is inappropriate. People often think that touching people on the back is just a natural thing, that you touch someone on the back. Some cultures, that's energy. That's where the energy comes, that's where it flows, and when you touch, it's a really personal thing. And you can actually transmit some of your energy, which could be negative or whatever, and make someone uncomfortable. Be very aware of touch and what is okay and what is not okay. And the way you do that is you just pay attention to the nonverbal the person's giving you and the way other people are interacting. The safe thing is always not touch if you're not sure. Just not doing it. I remember hugging once because I am a hugger, and I know it. I hugged a student one day. I felt horrible because she stiffened so tight, and I just felt horrible. And I've learned since, if I don't know the student well, I ask. And that's true in end of life too. Eye contact is different for different people. Some in cultures, eye contact can be that looking straight at somebody is disrespectful, looking down is respectful. You need to really understand, and you can, again, don't just assume because you read that this culture don't do eye contact. You need to really, you need to pay attention to what's happening with how other people are interacting. You have to really watch and be careful. And if somebody starts avoiding your eyes, you know, you're looking at them directly in the eye and they kind of begin to look around, that may also be a signal that you're really making them uncomfortable. That's too much eye contact. So just being aware. Okay. Any questions before I go into strategies? All right. You, at end of life, it is so crucial to be creative and empowering. Because I tell you what, the most disempowering thing that's going to happen to somebody is dying. Being told you're dying. Nothing you can do about it, that's it, you're dying, right? Very disempowering. So as a social worker, empowering people. How can we have someone feel empowered to do what it is they want to do, to live that life they want to live in that dying process? If somebody, so I'm going back to these that I brought up once before, if someone fears future suffering and they ask you a zillion times, you know, what's it going to be like? What's it going to be like? Is it going to hurt? Whatever. One thing, you need to be honest. You need to make sure that what you're telling them is right, and you need to be very honest with them. But the other thing is you need to repeat it again and again and again and again and again. They need to know. And there is a lot, and some of it's very real about how death cannot be so good. And does everybody have a good death? No, they don't. My dad had a really very good death with hospice. My mother did not have a good death with hospice. And that haunts me to this day. And she had me too. So it's not like hospice didn't try. And that's the thing, is we still have a ways to go even in medicine. So the point is, the best death we can get. Lack of sense of control. When someone's dying, their world shrinks. It becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. I had a social worker that came to, a hospice social worker came to speak to my students, and she told this story to make this point. She said she went into the patient's room, and this was a patient that she knew. He was bedridden. And she said he had, you know, those hospital trays that you pull over the bed and you put your stuff on. He had one. And when she walked in, she noticed that it was like really disordered and there were Kleenexes. And so she said, I just went up and said hi, and I started rearranging that tray. And she said, when I got done, I looked up, and she said he was furious with her. And he looked at her and he said, thanks a lot. That is the only thing I have control over anymore, and you just took that control away from me. And I thought that was, I really appreciated her sharing that story, because, you know, the thing about dying is your world does shrink. It does shrink. It shrinks to treatments, and then it shrinks to maybe being, you know, you're in the house most of the time, and then into a bedroom, and then into a bed. But we can give people control even when they are bedridden. There are ways to do that. Whether it's just simple things like I remember a man telling me, he said, could you get my wife to just allow me to pick out my clothes? I'd really like to be able to do that each day. He said, you know, that's all I got. That, and if I could choose a meal every now and then. Very small things, but those are things that make a difference. And remember, lack of control, one of the biggest things in terms of consideration to hasten death. And if you want to read more about this, there's an article that I wrote on sense of control, and the things that elders told me. So I do qualitative research where they talk, and there's a lot of wonderful quotes in there. It's a very powerful thing about how important control is. Lack of enjoyment in life. You know what? You know, people don't have to be miserable because they're dying. They could enjoy life. And I can tell you how many elders have showed me that, or how many elders who wanted to be able to enjoy life talked to me about the fact, could I talk to their family about the gloomy faces all the time, and about, you know, the one guy said, all I want is a chocolate frappe, he wanted the mocha frappe at Starbucks, and a chocolate donut, and they said, no, that's not good for you. He said, what the heck? Who cares? So, you know, I talked with this family. I got them to come up with it like it was their idea. I didn't tell them. But then when I came the next time, he was sitting there with that frappe and donut. He only had a sip or two and a bite or two, but he was happy. And he said, this is enjoying life. So thinking about whether it's games, whether it's grandchildren, you know, life can be enjoyed. But we don't know what enjoyment is until we listen. And not limit. So what if someone is hurting really bad, really hard for them to get in a car, but they want to go by the house where they were born, or the house where their parents, who cares? If they want to do it and they know they hurt, then I should make that happen. And I did trips with people. So that was important. I had one gentleman who wanted to go fishing, so we went to a trout farm and we caught icky fish. Both of us would scream every time a fish came up. He would run, I would run. Unfinished business. I've had people make lists and say, okay, I had one woman who had a 2-page list. She said, boy, I hope I live long enough to do all of this. And I said, well, work fast. So we did get through her list. But people do. They have things that they just want to get done. But if their world is small and they're kind of limited, they need help in getting some of those things done. I had one woman what she wanted to get done was she wanted to resolve the estrangement with her daughter. And so she wrote a letter and she had me read it. We sent it to her daughter who lived just down the road, came back unopened. She sent another letter, came back unopened. She tried to call her, hung up on her. I called her daughter and her daughter said, yeah, I heard that Mom's dying, and she said, I'm really sorry about that. Tell her I wish her the best, but I don't want to have anything to do with her. And we tried a multitude of ways, and then finally what I said to her one day was, I said, you know, I think that, she said, I'm worried time is drawing so close. And I said, you know, maybe we could look at this a little differently. And she said, how? And I said, why don't we work on you forgiving yourself? Your daughter may not forgive you, but you can forgive yourself. And so that's what we worked on. And she talked through what had happened, and you know, and that was very helpful for her. And her daughter never did forget her. But she got to the place where she forgave herself. So really thinking about that unfinished business, you know, and what they need, and being creative about that. And dignity, you know, it's so hard when you're dying, because the things that, you know, like we go in a bathroom, we don't want anybody to know that we're going going in the bathroom. You know, you don't want people to know when you're using the bathroom. I mean, we've got all these things. We're not going to walk around naked. You know, we want to be covered up, and there's all these rules that parents shouldn't see their grown children shouldn't see their parents, you know, naked. Well, all that goes to the wayside when people are dying. And that gets into dignity issues, and it can be really, really hard for people. All of a sudden, an adult child is wiping their parent's bottom. Really hard for bathing them. And so it's really important as much as possible to think about how we can give dignity. I remember working with a gentleman who was dying, and when they would bathe him, he had dementia, but he would get so upset and he would fight. And I talked to his daughter, and she said, it's just that Dad was so private. And so I talked to the nursing assistant, and I said, could we keep him covered up, and could you just pull back a sheet on a corner and wash that, put the sheet back, and just continue to do that? So I said that at least the whole sheet's not off of him. And he did fine with that. He stopped fighting. So dignity is important to us. Sometimes it's hard for people to have that dignity. I remember when my mom was dying and I was having to help her shower, and the way we did it was we just made jokes. We joked the whole way through. She'd say, you know, I forgot what it was. You got soap in my eyes. And I'm like, well, then keep your head back. And, you know, we were laughing, but I knew laughter was the good thing with my mother. So helping family members know what is the thing that works to bring dignity. But it means knowing the person, and families are a great resource for that. Dependence or burden. We can work on those things too, because what we can give is a way we can help to reframe for somebody who is dying and feeling like they're a burden, but we can also think of ways that that person can help, who can be useful. And that often can eliminate that feeling of being a burden, and I'll give you an example in a minute. All the social support pieces, you know, that's up to us to be very aware of what the issues are in families. That's why the family is the client too. We need to know if there are problems in a family. I used to spend more time with families than I actually did the person who was dying, because the issues would be so great. If you think about it, I know sometimes those children would be like 50 and 60, but I'm telling you, mom's dying, everybody reverts back to where they were in a kid, and they're yelling things like, you were always mom's favorite. Well, you always were yelling at mom. I mean, it was like everybody was once again 10 and 12 years old. And that's kind of the way they interacted every time there was a crisis. So that support, I've had people tell me, so the thing I want from you, I want you to go out there and fix them, because I'm not dying peaceably here. They're out there fighting and yelling and stuff, and I'm just trying to be in here relaxing and resting and doing my thing. And that guy was so funny. So I went out and I really worked on his family, but working with them so that he could die, because really, seriously, his worry was, you know, are they going to fight after I go? Is this it? Is this what I'm leaving? And I don't want that. So ways to begin to make sure that support is good support for them. And if they're in a bad situation like that woman was, working on how we either get that woman out of that situation, if she wants out, self-determination, or working with the son on what his deal is. So, and the feeling invisible, I talked to y'all about that. I can't tell you, I'll give you an example. When the woman died, whose daughter she was estranged from, she had 4 children, and she went into active dying, and it was much sooner than we'd ever thought, and we knew the children were not going to get there. It was like 2 a.m. in the morning. We knew it just wasn't going to happen. So I went and got the phone. She was in a coma, and I went and got the phone and brought it into the room, and I called the oldest son, and I said, your mom is dying, you know, I didn't just do that, but you know what I mean, I did all this stuff, and then said, and your mom is in a coma, but she can hear you, and I'm going to put the phone up to her ear so that you can talk to her. She won't talk back, but she'll be able to hear you. And I watched her facial expressions, and afterwards he said, did she even react? And I said, let me tell you the reaction. I said, she was grinning. At one point, she had this sideways smile. And he said, I told her a funny story about what I did when she was a kid behind her back. And it made him, he said, she really did hear me, didn't she? And I said, she did. And I said, she also had a tear at one point. And then he told me what he was talking about then. I did that with each child. So they got to say goodbye. But you know what? She did too. And so that's the thing about the invisibility. I have done that with people with dementia where the person is in a coma. The daughter wants one last, she wants one last connection with her mother. We had her bring in a photo album, and we went through the photo album, and I said, I want us, the three of us, to talk. So she was saying, Mom, do you remember when, Uncle so-and-so did this? And we saw a smile, we saw a tear, and her daughter said, I got to connect with her. Never ever feel that just because somebody is not awake and talking, that they're not there. Make them visible. Spiritual. Meaning is important. Talking with people about their life and what gives them meaning, that's fine. People want to talk about those stuff, and when they don't, they'll let you know like right away. I don't talk about that kind of stuff. I had one man that said, I'm really just kind of a plain person. He said, I'm going to kick the bucket. He said, I don't need doing this psychosocial stuff you're going to do. He said, this is what I need. And he was just like bang, bang, bang. So we didn't do any of what I've talked about. But then there have been other people who really wanted to talk about life having meaning. And whether it lacked meaning then or they feared that it had always lacked meaning. And that's when reminiscence, really going through their life and having them talk about their life and helping them to reframe some things they missed that they really made important contributions. Were they President of the United States? No, but they made important contributions. So that's important. Feeling useless. That's a big one, and somebody can feel useful even in a bed. I'll give you an example. I had a woman I went to see, first time I saw her, and she was just so sad, so sad. And I said, how are you doing? And she said, I'll be honest, I'm just sad. And I said, can you tell me more about why you feel that way? And she said, I feel that way because, she said, I'm just in this stupid bed every day. She said, I can't get out of it. She said, my family has to take care of me, so I'm a burden. She said, I contribute nothing, not one thing to this household. She said, it's my daughter-in-law's house, and my daughter-in-law's wonderful, and my son is wonderful. And she said, I have 2 beautiful grandchildren. But she said, nothing. I contribute nothing. I just want to die. What is the point? And so we talked a little bit, and then I went and talked to her daughter. And of course, I couldn't tell her daughter what she had told me because it was confidential. But when I went out there, her daughter said the same thing. She's so sad. I don't know what to do. I don't want her to be so sad. And I said, well, tell me about who your mother was, your mother-in-law. And she said, oh, she was just this busy woman. She said she was always, her thing was to be useful to people. And she was talking, and she looked at me and she said, she really loved to be useful. And I said, do you think she feels useful now? And she said, I don't think so. She said, but how do I help her to be useful? And so we talked, and what we came up with, what the daughter came up with, was for the mother to tell a story to the grandkids at night. Well, the grandmother took it a little further. When I came back the next time, she's beaming. And I said, woo, you're looking happy today. And she said, you bet. She said, my daughter-in-law and my son bring the kids in every night, and they get up on the bed, and she said, all day long I think to myself, what story do I want them to know about their heritage? What legacy do I want to leave? And she said, so then I tell that story. I tell the story of how I was brought home from the hospital in a wagon with horses, and and she said the kids laugh and they love it and they listen. She said, they'll remember that. She said, I just feel so useful. Very easy thing, right? So creativity is so important. People's beliefs, honoring what is sacred, this is a tough one. It's a tough one because oftentimes honoring what is sacred, if we're having to do it within institutions, can be tough. Advocating for our clients that there be a room where if there's no such thing as extended family, family is the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th cousin. That's just family. Visiting hours, whatever it is. Advocating for the needs of our clients. So we honor what is sacred in their life. We even had one woman who was dying, and in their culture, it was a Norwegian thing, I can't remember, but you had to have your hands, after you died, you had to have a mold of your hands. We couldn't find anybody who would do that. We looked and we finally called the local college art department, And somebody said, well, it won't bother me that she's dead, I'll do it. Did it? They're up on the mantle like they're supposed to. So just always this being creative. And the last thing is walking forward. So as professionals, this really is the important key. How do we walk forward on a journey providing culturally competent care with individuals from diverse cultures with perspectives different than our own, and we do it ethically and with appropriate boundaries. And appropriate boundaries, are boundaries black and white? Are they one thing or another? Absolutely not. They are so gray. So we have to think about what is appropriate. We have to become aware. We have to remember that we talk about self-determination in social work, and I often will tell my students, what about familial determination? What about cultures where it's not the individual who makes the decision, it is the family? So we honor self-determination by honoring familial determination. Being aware that more family-centered. I had an oncologist who came to me, and I was doing training with the oncologist, and you know, he was struggling because he was working with a family from China, an area of China, and you know what, guys? What time am I supposed to end this? 11:30? Okay. Okay, good. I thought, what if it's 11:15? I can calm down. Okay, China. So he said to me, he said, you know what? I want to talk to her and tell her she's dying. But the family light gets all around the bed and says, absolutely not. And he said, she has the right to know that she's dying. And he said, the family just refuses. And I told him, I said, in the area, I said, there are cultures where it would actually, if you were to tell her that she was dying, if you were to tell her that, you would bring great shame on her. Because basically what you have just said is, I don't trust that you've raised your children well enough to make the decisions. So you bring great shame. And he said, that still doesn't help me with her. And I said, what you can say to her is, how much do you want to know about your health and your care? And I said, if she says, my children tell my children, I said, then you've given her self-determination. You don't say to her, do you want to know if you're dying or not? Or do you want to know your prognosis? So, because we have to remember that not all cultures see it as the individual who's dying needing to know that. And that's the thing about preference, about prognosis and disclosure. Talking about death and dying can be harmful. I've already kind of talked about that a little bit when I mentioned the Navajo. There are many cultures where it truly, talking about it, not good. And we need to be aware of that. So I'm just always very careful, and I would always ask people how much they wanted to know, how much, you know, to let them make the decisions so that we don't do something. Because what are the ethical challenges here? There's some really great ones, right? Because we say we're self-determination, you know, we need to make sure that the client has self-determination, but we can do that. We just have to think creatively, just like I told the oncologist. In terms of boundary violations, you really have to think about gift giving. I've accepted gifts before, and I've turned them away. There was a gift, a person wanted to give me a check for $800. Did I want to take the check? You bet. But did I take it? No. I did say to him, I can't take the check. I said, you know, if that's something that you want to do, what about if you gave it to the hospice organization that I work for? And so he gave it to the hospice organization. But I also had people that would make tiny crafts for me, and I took those because I knew that they had made this pot holder. They had made something, and for them, that was the way they lived. And that was their way of saying thank you to me. And so for me not to take it would have been offensive. Food, same way. You have to think about, you know, and you have to know, you know, you might have a client that's always pushing the boundaries. Well, then I probably wouldn't take stuff because that would make me nervous because they're already pushing the boundary and I really need to set it. So boundaries, you really have to think about about this. And one of the things I would say is, if you're not sure, go to a supervisor. Go talk to somebody. Have a friend. I was very fortunate to have someone that was such a good clinician and really knew end of life. And I knew that anytime I was uncertain, I could call and do a consult with her. And she was always so helpful. I don't care if you've practiced 30, 40 years, you're going to need consults. It's just going to happen. And a good social worker will be okay with that and say, you know what, I don't know everything. I don't know how to handle everything. This is time when I need to say, I need help with thinking about how to do it. Anytime you're not sure. Being humble is really important in social work, because if we let our egos get in the way, we can end up really hurting the client without meaning to. Being careful not to interrupt, because interrupting, stepping into space, all of those are boundaries. So it's not just a boundary of gift giving, etc. Also, triangulation. What I mean by that is that you also don't want to get into something where there's boundaries, because you've got a family member trying to set one boundary and telling you a boundary, the client trying to set another, and then there you are going, wow. So you really have to be aware that you're working with families and with the person who's dying. Advocating for clients. So the thing that I think my mother's death, and I will always be grateful to her, her death, as I said before, I usually don't do personal, but this was my aha moment. My mom's death will always stick with me. And that's one thing Cicely Saunders, who started hospice, talked about, that how someone dies lives on in the minds of those that live on. But what my mom's death did was, before that, I would tell you I'm a clinician, I'm a one-on-one, I don't do public speaking, I don't go to Washington, I don't talk to legislatures. That's not me, that's not who I am. I'm gonna leave that to other people. And my mom's death taught me that I can't say that as a social worker. As a social worker, if I'm a true generalist social worker, if I want to be a social worker that really impacts the lives of my clients, then I can't say that. That is my job. And so I got involved at the national level. I got involved with a new social work organization that's fighting back against medicalizing palliative care. I'm president of another organization that works on educating people about elders and end of life. I've gone to Washington several times for M.S.W headquarters to do think tanks about the issues, met with Medicare people, totally out of my comfort zone. But, you know, we can do so much as social workers at the bedside or as individuals, but you know what? It's that upstream, downstream then. Because then we are always downstream trying to fix what really needs to be fixed upstream, so that nobody has to experience those things. Nobody should not have access to good pain medicine. It just shouldn't happen. Everybody should have good pain medication. When I think about it, I had one man, I could hear him screaming when I got out of my car. Those things should not happen. And it shouldn't happen that people can't get their psychosocial and spiritual needs met. You know, that shouldn't happen. So if I just continually work with each individual, am I ever really going to change things? No, I'll make it good best as I can with an individual. What I have to do is begin to get involved at the community level. I work with communities. I work with the Hmong community. I work with different tribes. Get involved, because it's not that I speak for those communities. No way. Those communities are the experts on their community. What I do is whatever they want. Like most of the time it's research. They want me to teach them how to do research, or they want me to come in and do a workshop, or they want me to go with them to a legislature, whatever it is. But we work with communities. We partner with communities. We don't take care of communities. And also, you know, we need to be at that table. Let me tell you, social work, we're not good at it. We are not at that table. We didn't even have a national social work organization for hospice and palliative care social workers. And I love nurses and docs. I work with them. But let me tell you, they were totally going the medical direction and still are. And if social workers didn't get at that table, that was where it was going. And we've really worked to break into some of these organizations. like the American Association of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. We have our first conference there that will happen next week. Those are the things we need to do. We need to say to people, you know what? If you're going to do palliative care, let's look back at the World Health Organization definition, and let's make sure that we provide it in a manner that is holistic. This is not about me, the big social worker, you, the big physician, you, the big nurse. None of that. That is about patients who are dying, and they deserve good care. So we have to be at the table to ensure that happens, which means we have to step out of our comfort zone. I'll give you one quick example. National level. Y'all probably remember the Affordable Health Care Act, right? Well, still here and definitely impacting us. But one of the things early on was Obama had put in that that physicians would be required to have conversations with people to do advanced care planning. Advanced care planning just simply to sit down, let's do an advanced directive, that. What happened is we heard about death panels. Remember that? All of a sudden those were death panels. And it was a sneaky way for us to go in, and this is not a Republican or a Democrat thing, that is not where I'm going. With the death panels, it became the talk to avoid having that pass with that in it. And so what happened was it got taken out. Tried again with Medicare annual wellness visits, and in a Medicare annual wellness visit, that there be a discussion to get people to do their advanced care directives. Again, public support for it, but the media came back and started talking about death panels again, and so it was removed. Those are the times when we need to speak up. Those are the times when we need to be loud as the media, if not louder. Okay, the last thing, and I'm not going to go over this. These are wonderful questions. I would like to say they are mine, that I made them up, and I can take credit for them, but that would be a lie. They are from Lum and Arnold, and they are wonderful. You can tweak these. These are really tweaked more for end of life. But these are really good questions, because students will say to me, okay, you say cultural competence is you don't have to know everything there is to know about everybody. That's right. That is not cultural competence. Cultural competence is meeting people where they are and learning who they are and what they want and not making assumptions. So then the students say, so how do I do that? These are great questions for doing that. These are also very empowering. There's nothing more empowering than people not making assumptions and asking who you are so that you get to say who you are. That can be empowering. So these questions are all in here, and I've got them about decision making and practices, and so you have them all.